Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome once again to Bless You, Rowan.
This wrong timing.
Nice, beautifully on the beat.
Terrible timing.
First property podcast. This one's called Property Matters. We discuss things that affect those of us that work within or around or within the environs of the property market. As ever, my faithful companion Hamish McClay of Search Convey is with me to try and cast some pearls of wisdom. Rowan Walker, oftentimes writer, professional pen by trade, originally an estate agent himself. Today's topic kind of leans into that, the disappearing local estate agent. But before that, Hamish McClay.
Very much a subject that matters too, and welcome to you this afternoon. There is much going on, as we well know, within conveyancing. It was an interesting subject last week in one of our podcasts about the disappearance of local solicitors. And of course, the disappearance of local solicitors also means, for various different reasons, we don't need to go into that today, but of course, they take with them local knowledge, local wisdom, and wisdom of law, of course, which is so vitally important. But it's the local knowledge that we need so much. And of course, in the work that I do as a researcher or search agent, local knowledge is absolutely vital to what I do and any of the people I engage my work with. And once we start losing those people, we lose actually some of the best, because they can actually tell you the story about the property rather than saying, hey, look, we've got a property. And I mean, Rowan in particular was one of those that used to love his historical treks around Oxfordshire that he used to do when time was something that he had a little bit more of. But it was good to because just that local knowledge, it just shows what a difference it makes. And sadly, some of these local local estate agents we're losing are some of the best, because there are styles and types of estate agents as well, as Rowan, I'm sure, can tell us.
Mm-hmm. Well, welcome to the show, Rowan. It appears to me that the landscape of estate agency has radically changed over the previous 10 years. I remember where the place was awash with them, and now it seems to be ever reducing in number. Now, before we came into the green room, you said that you were going to do a little bit of casting around. Did you manage to find anything on that?
Yeah, I found a statistic from January 2024, which was featured in a news report. It was about high street branch closures, specifically estate agents. There was almost 5,000 in 2023. So there are 4,799. And that comes from data from 20EA, which looks into this sort of thing. And of those, though, it's listed 2,800 being sales offices and then 1,200 being lettings offices. And therefore, I'm not sure exactly how these figures match up, because you most often get estate agents being letting agents as well. So it would be unusual if these were 2,800 like individual sales offices and then 1,200 lettings offices. So, but let's say there are about 3,000 closures in that 1 year in 2023, and my agency was one of them. I closed in 2023, and I was a high street estate agent. So so I suppose if that's just one example in 1 year, and then since then we've had 2024 and we've had 2025 and we've had half of 2026.
Yeah, but
and then I suppose the story is, what are we looking at?
But the complexion over 2025, 2026, that's undergone some changes all of its own, right?
Well, there's changes and there's changes. So what we're seeing in 2026, anecdotally, so I'm now talking as a writer, having written about this sort of thing, but I haven't got the actual statistics and data to hand. But what we are seeing a lot more of is mergers and acquisitions. So we're seeing bigger firms buying estate agencies, not necessarily smaller estate agencies closing down. Like mine was a small estate agency that closed down in 2023, and I think that was the story then. This year, they're not necessarily closing down; they're being acquired and they're being merged in, and that means they're not necessarily disappearing from the high street. But it depends now what we're missing, what we're talking about in this episode when we're talking about the disappearance of the local high street estate agent. Does the fact that they've been bought by a big corporate group, but nevertheless remained as an estate agency branch on the high street, stop them being a local high street estate agent, or do they maintain a position on the high street, but they are they're something different? They're a local estate agency branch, but they haven't got that local independent high street feel in the same way as people want to walk down their high street and find a butcher and a baker and a candlestick maker. Do they care or not that there are no longer, Jones and Son estate agents on the corner?
Do you know, it's an interesting one, that I walked down the high street near us, and we're in a tiny hamlet away from any real town. But when you go to the town, which is like 20 minutes away, you walk down there, and it's a lot of boarded up shops.
Uh-huh.
And although you can still see like some coffee shops are moving in, and when coffee shops move into a high street, that's a good news, because that usually means that the owners of the coffee shop perceive that the clientele are of a sufficiently moneyed level that they're willing to pay for their overpriced coffee. Mm-hmm. But even with that little bit of a push, still a lot of shops, and I've noticed estate agents is disappearing. Do you think this is an ongoing trend, or is it just a blip?
I think there's a trend into different models of estate agency. So I think that more estate agents are moving away from high street premises, but they're not closing. They're going into hub-based estate agency. Some of those senior managers within that estate agency firm that feel like they've reached the peak of where they can get to, or some of the disenchanted estate agents in corporate estate agency that would have, like I did once upon a time, went out from corporate, decided I'd set up on my own and then had an estate agency for 10 years. Those people now, rather than go, right, I'm going to go and invest £150,000 of my money into this lunatic operation on the high street, they'll go, right, I'm going to go and take for 150 quid a month a license with an umbrella self-employed brokerage, and I'll be quite happy to pay them 30% of my fee for every house I sell, because for 150 quid a month I've got no other real running costs, and it allows me to get up the road. So we've got this massive growth in not online estate agency, because I don't mean that, in independent estate agents that haven't necessarily got branches, but they operate in exactly this. They operate as estate agents. They operate in to all intents and purposes like the old-fashioned high street estate agent did. But the difference is that often they're now solo operators. They're not operating as a team of people. They aren't then saying hello in the morning to the postman as he comes and drops off the mail at the door. They're not doing the DX run and seeing the local solicitor because they're dropping off the sales letters that are going out that day, or whatever else it might be. So there's a shift away from what the old system of estate agency used to be, if you go back 15, 20, 30 years, right, into a new model, but it's a variation of the old model. And their attitude towards it is the same. They still want to go out, and they do want to be in their communities. They do want to be a force for good in their community. So I don't think this is a bad model. I just think that it makes sense from a financial point of view to not go, right, I can't wait to start spending £2,000 a month on rent, plus £1,200 on rates, plus £300 on comms, plus £250 on electric bills. Oh, plus the £5,500 I will have to spend on 2 members of staff. Because there's a different way of doing it now. So it's no surprise that, for example, EXP has now reached over 1,000 independent estate agents under their umbrella. TA UK is coming up, quite close behind. Purple Bricks is making a comeback under Kenny Bruce, that's now kind of come back in as CEO. You've got Avocado Group selling into IAD. So IAD is something now, this French model is now a proper force in estate agent. Not that it wasn't the proper force before, but all of a sudden it's much noisier. They've just bought another sort of self-employed brokerage model in Scotland. So they're growing and acquiring. This is definitely, and although it only makes up 3% of the market or whatever it is, that was only 1% of the market 3 years ago. So they've had 300% growth in these last couple of years.
So let's talk briefly about local knowledge, because Hamish and I have always been ones for championing local knowledge over sort of corporate centralization. So what does local knowledge actually mean? Is knowing average house prices enough to call yourself an estate agent or a local expert?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so part of what I do, I write for a few estate agents as the professional pen. I mean, it's not limited to estate agency, but a lot of my customers are estate agents. And one of the things that we talk about a lot are what local house prices are, because it's often an interesting story, not necessarily what they are, but how they've changed and how they've moved, and often how they've moved vis-a-vis what the general story is that you'll see in the news, that house prices have just dropped for the second month in a row, according to Rightmove or whatever it is. And you go, well, actually, here in Oxford, they've gone up by 2.6% since May. And there's a story there that you can tell, right? So telling that story on a local level, it's not about the house prices, but it is about showing your local knowledge. Now, local knowledge, that's an interesting one. So I don't come from Oxford. I come from Ipswich. When I live in Oxford, but I was a branch manager in Abingdon. I quickly learned local school catchments, local bus routes, what the best, cafe was to go and get a croissant. When I set up on my own, I set up in Oxford because I wasn't allowed to trade in Abingdon, because that was the embargo of the contract. And I was a very good boy. I didn't breach my contract at all. So I set up in Oxford, and although I lived in Oxford, but basically every day I would leave the house at 7 o'clock in the morning to drive to Abingdon, and every day I would get back in at 9 o'clock at night, and I'd work Saturdays in Abingdon as well. And then on Sundays we'd go off to the Cotswolds or something rather than do anything in Oxford. I had no knowledge of Oxford at all as a non-Oxford person, so I had to learn it all again. So although I was local, my local knowledge was pretty limited. So I think that being involved and getting involved becomes more important than the actual local knowledge, and being visible and caring about the community you're in, which I do. I was a champion for my local community in Cutslow. I got involved with local campaigns like, the community orchard and all of that sort of thing. And that's because I cared about it. It was an interesting cause to me, and it was about my very local area. And it's not that I wouldn't have supported City Farm over on the other side of the city, but my local community was important to me as a father of daughters growing up in Cutslow. So I became a local Cutslow person. And that's when I then set up my high street office, which came 3 years later. I set it up in Summertown, which was the local high street for Cutslow. So I was a good old-fashioned local estate agent, because I was embedded in my local community. And, the history of it, you can find out, you can learn all of that sort of thing. But I think actually being properly involved and invested in the community that you live and serve is to me, it matters. But it doesn't matter whether you've got a high street office to show for it. And it doesn't matter if you're a corporate estate agent either. If you're a corporate estate agent on that high street, but you're invested in it and you're invested in your local community, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced that corporate estate agents tend to follow that process, though. But okay, moving on. Property portals. Do they make every agent look the same?
Well, they are a great leveler. So estate agents have all got access to effectively the same market. How an estate agent chooses to present themselves on a portal is down to the estate agent. So the portal doesn't do that for them. An estate agent is very capable of cocking up their photos. They're very capable of misspelling or writing just poor, or even writing AI slop, particulars that don't do the property any justice, or perhaps they do. So an estate agent's got responsibility for how they present on the portals, but the portals, no doubt have allowed buyers to find them. I mean, for years, that's been the great leveler. AI coming along is going to allow buyers to take a lot more control over how they search. And
well, they can certainly use it if they know what they're doing.
If they know what they're doing, but there'll soon be tools that allow them to do it. There'll be an AI tool that allows them to search on that tool that will go and look through the portals.
There'll be an AI tool.
Talk to me about what sort of house you want, and it will go off looking.
There'll be an AI tool that writes the prompt to allow them to interrogate the AI tools that will in turn interrogate the portals. Yeah, I can see it all coming. Has convenience come at a price, though?
Yes, I think it has, and I think this is why estate agents don't feel the need for a high street office, because there's less footfall on the high street. I mean, the high street is not a busy place anymore. Oxford City Centre doesn't actually. Oxford City Centre has got one estate agent that I can name that's in the city, that's properly in the city centre, and then there's a couple that are just outside the city centre.
Right? That's a reduction. It's been that way.
So I've lived in Oxford since 2009, and having lived in Oxford since 2009, there was perhaps one other brand that had what you could have called a city centre office. It was just by the train station. They've moved out of there now because that whole area is being developed. So we've got Brecon and Brecon that are left on High Street. The road is called High Street Oxford. But even still, it's not bang in the middle of the city. But that's because people don't really go to the city. The city centre is full of tourists. It's not full of local people. And the local people in Oxford are in Summertown because they're local to Summertown. They're in Headington because they're local to Headington. They're at Cowley Centre because they're local to Cowley. And the estate agents have all got branches in these clusters of shopping precincts that are in those neighbourhoods, and a lot of them still do. So I think Summertown, when I was in Summertown, there were 13 estate agents in Summertown. You know, and actually, so people were criticising me for going into Summertown because they said we don't want another estate agent. I'm like, but do you want a local estate agent? Because I literally am the only local estate agent in Summertown. I literally do live here, whereas everybody else is driving in 40 minutes to come and open this shop in the morning. So careful what you wish for.
Yeah,
so
cool.
So I think that there is still these pockets of areas where you have local populations that will go and use those high streets, and they do. But the idea that people go in and they sit there and have a cup of tea and talk about what's going on with their property, that's becoming much more rare. And actually, from a productivity point of view, we could lose an hour of a day with somebody coming in to talk about the property that they already talked to us about yesterday because they're just a bit lonely, and it stops us working for an hour of that 8-9 hour day we've got. Whereas if you take that shop off the high street, all of a sudden you've got the ability to open your laptop at 8:30 in the morning in your home office or on your kitchen table like I am, and then do a good 10-hour day and pop off on your viewings and do your sales chasing and not have all of those distractions. So, and don't have the cost. So it's pros and cons.
Hamish, I've got a question for you. And this is something that harks back to something you and I discuss a lot. Does local knowledge actually sell houses?
In reality, yes. I believe it to be very, very important. And I mean, that's why, and there's several others. There's not just Rowan who's sort of worked or who works as an estate agent in Oxford. There are several others, and you notice they're local. The strangest thing is they weren't necessarily, and I love the way Rowan actually sort of covered this, they're not necessarily local people initially, but they have taken the trouble because of their professionalism to understand that what the property is, and of course the price is, there's two things, of course. It's really normally price and position, right, where exactly that particular sort of property is. And there's some amazing spots in Oxford, but there's some appalling places in Oxford where you wouldn't want to buy anything. Unfortunately, the price doesn't necessarily reflect it because it's just pretty bloody expensive anywhere you go. But having sort of said that, the local knowledge is, and an idea came to me, and I don't know about the reality of this. Basically, the high street, of those shops that are open, probably about 30% are estate agents. Massive build area in Bicester. But I'd never seen anybody walk into an estate agent. They look at the window, see the property in the window, discuss it, and then move on. They don't actually go inside. I just wondered if it's possible to grab a window somewhere, Rowan, and put all your properties up there that you're actually working with, although you're working from a distance.
Well, it could be. I mean, you used to get things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
you can have digital displays nowadays, can't you?
Right.
Yeah, I suppose if you've got somebody who's got a spare window and they want to rent you the space, you could. I mean, they might be very grateful for the extra income at the moment, running their florist or whatever it might be.
That's right, because most of those places, like, right, this is the sadness of it. It's only people like normally they're corporate, and I think there's one independent estate agent in Bicester. I think there's a new one moving in, which I don't know about.
You've actually got a couple in Bicester. You just might not know they're independent. You might not know, you might not realise they are independent.
We will speak about that then. But
I've got a final question for you, Rowan, before I pass back to Hamish. It's a big one. In 10 years, in your mind, and I know this is just crystal ball gazing, what will a generally brilliant estate agent look like?
It's a really boring answer, and it's going to look, roughly speaking, like it does now. There will be a blend of bigger corporate estate agents, smaller local estate agents on the high street, and there'll be an army of independent estate agents. The reality is that the independent estate agents that sort of signed up for, let's say, EXP 6 years ago when it first opened, and made a good name for themselves, being out on their own and, against the kind of not against, but different to the high street models, etc., etc. They have become successful and they've become well known in their communities, and they have started opening premises offices in high street or off high street locations. So, but not hubs, not hub offices. I'm talking about shop fronts where members of the public can come in. They might not be the high street. They might not be spending the £40,000 a year on the rent, but they might be spending £17,500 a year in a neighbourhood rather than in the town centre. But they're coming back to the high street. So I still think that to connect with your local market, estate agents do want to be seen and want to be visible. And I think the market, and I saw there's an estate agent, an EXP agent called Ashley Wood in Solihull, I think, or somewhere in the West Midlands. And he's just gone and opened a lovely big branch in the high street. And he said in a post on LinkedIn that he's had 2 or 3 valuation or instructions that have become instructions because they've walked into the office to book the valuation. He said, would they have booked anyway? They might have done, but they definitely did come into the office. So people, human beings, like this social contact. We are social creatures. We lived in packs. We crowded around the campfire. We told each other stories, and that's and then we got into and then become civilization. So humans are hardwired for it. We crave the social element of going down, meeting people, talking about issues and problems, and then finding the right agent. So I don't think that's going to be replaced, but rent and rates and right move costs and energy costs make it increasingly difficult to make profit. So you'll see more go bust, you'll see others start up, then they'll go bust, and others will start up, and then they'll go bust, and then that cycle will continue, but so has it always done.
Wow. Hamish, would you care to bring us home, please?
I think that the sad news is very little to do with the property market itself, but very much to do with the imposition of cost upon anybody trying to trade anywhere, particularly in the high street. I mean, it sort of saddens me because I do like being independent soul myself, being an independent company, but working with a cooperative where we can support each other is great. And that's more or less what Rome was speaking about. That's superb. I don't need to have a high street office. I'd like to have it, but it's the absolute cost of it. I mean, looked into it, for a very small office that I would actually sort of need, the price was going to cost just the basic rent The cost of the lease was £1,500 a month. And that is sort of, in terms of what I do, that's a big sort of, that is just the basic sort of cover of the lease. I didn't look into the business rates. I didn't look into the cost of getting the supply of the electricity that Rowan spoke of. Total impossibility. Would it make my company any better? Actually, no, it wouldn't in terms of what I do. But I do miss that sort of the local presence. I used to love the local shops. The one, as Rowan sort of said, Waller and Co. is a darn sight more attractive proposition than Connell's.
No, well, I think so. It feels like you've got engendered local knowledge. If it feels like they grew up in the locality, I mean, as you've pointed out, Rowan, that might not be the case. It could be that they've assimilated to that local area and whatever. But overall, working or trying to gain your new properties through a nameless, faceless, monolithic organization, I always think that's a worse bet than someone who was man and boy, worked within an area and hence knows all the iniquities of it, and also all the good parts. Thank you both, Hamish, as ever, with your steady hand on the tiller, and Rowan for your sage advice. And to anyone watching, the future of estate agency may or may not be in doubt, but the future of property podcasting, there's plenty more to come. We've got Ipsicana Magic tomorrow, followed by Property Quorum on Thursday, and heading up to Cladding Matters on Friday. And remember, we were supposed to have the deadline for Cladding Matters last Friday. Unfortunately, through a bereavement, we were unable to do so, but we've extended the deadline. So hopefully, maybe, well, we've already had a couple of people reach out. Let's see if we can have some more. And then maybe a special guest as well. But watch out for that. That's Cladding Matters, 1 o'clock on Friday. Until then, please keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. And in these rather troubled times, do look after your mental health and wear some sunscreen. Take care. Bye-bye.